Why don't you run human? The question came out in that weird, clicking, hissing language the Keth'ari used when they were trying to sound intimidating, which, let's be honest, was pretty much all the time, standing there in her full battle regalia all. 7 FT of chitinous armor and razor-sharp mandibles. Commander Zixth probably expected me to wet myself and sprint for the nearest escape pod. Instead, I took another sip of my coffee and gave her the kind of look usually reserved for telemarketers and people who don't return their shopping carts. Because I said, setting the mug down with deliberate calm, I'm drinking coffee. The silence that followed was the kind you could cut with a knife. Hell, you could probably cut it with a spoon if you put some effort into it. The bridge of the captured human vessel. Meridian suddenly felt about as comfortable as a funeral parlor during a comedy show. Now let me back up a bit here because I realize this probably needs some context. See, 3 hours. Ago I was having what I generously call a Tuesday. You know the kind. Nothing particularly exciting happening. Just another routine patrol along the Outer Rim territories, checking for pirates, smugglers, and the occasional interdimensional tourist who'd taken a wrong turn at Alpha Century. Then the Keth'ari showed up. The Keth'ari, for those of you keeping score at home, are what happens when you take a praying mantis, scale it up to human size, give it a superiority complex, and arm it with technology. That makes our best weapons look like particularly aggressive bottle rockets. They're also what you might call conquest enthusiasts, the kind of species that looks at a peaceful solar system and thinks, you know what, this needs more screaming and fewer property rights. So there I was, Captain Jake Morrison of the Meridian, enjoying what was supposed to be a nice, quiet patrol, when suddenly my proximity alarm started having what I can only describe as a complete nervous breakdown, red lights everywhere, sirens, wailing like banshees with sinus infections, and my communications officer, a fresh-faced kid named Novak, looking like he just witnessed his entire world view get fed through a wood chipper. Captain Novak had stammered, We've got a really big problem. Define. Really big, I said. Because in my experience, problems come in all shapes and sizes, and it's important to know whether you're dealing with forgot to file the right paperwork big or accidentally started an interstellar war. Big. Keth'ari battlecruiser, he'd replied. Just dropped out of hyperspace. They're hailing us. Now, getting hailed by a Keth'ari battlecruiser is a bit like getting a dinner invitation from a serial killer. Sure, they're being polite about it, but you're pretty sure you know how this story ends. And spoiler alert, it's not with you going home and telling funny stories to your grandkids. Put them through, I'd said, because what else do you do? Pretend you're not home. These weren't Jehovah's Witnesses. They had sensors. The view screen had flickered to life, revealing Commander Zixth Thor in all her terrifying glory. If you've never seen a Keth'ari before, imagine a praying mantis that went to the gym religiously for about 15 years, then got really into medieval armor. And you're about halfway there. The other half involves nightmares and a sudden urge to check your life insurance policy. Human vessel, she'd said. And I've got to give her credit. Her translator made her sound exactly as condescending. As she probably intended, you will surrender immediately and prepare to be boarded. Resistance is futile and will result in your immediate vaporization. That's when I'd made what my crew would later describe as either the bravest or stupidest decision of my career. I'd leaned back in my captain's chair, taken a sip of my coffee, and said, Yeah, that's going to be a hard pass from me, thanks. The look on her face, well, as much as you can read expressions on something that looks like it escaped from a biology textbook's worst nightmares, had been absolutely priceless. You could practically see the gears grinding in her head as she tried to process what she just heard. You refuse? She'd asked, like I just told her that gravity was optional and mathematics was more of a suggestion than a hard rule. Yep, I'd said, popping the P for emphasis. See, here's the thing, and I don't know if this got lost in translation or if your species just never got the memo, but humans are kind of notorious for not surrendering when large, scary aliens show up and demand it. It's like our thing. right up there with making terrible decisions and putting ketchup on food that doesn't need it. What followed was about 15 minutes of the most one-sided space battle in recorded history. The Keth'ari, as it turns out, have some pretty impressive weapons. Energy cannons that could punch through moon missile systems that make our best warheads look like firecrackers and shields that could probably stop a small black hole if it was having an off day. We had the Meridian, which was, well, it was a patrol vessel built for intimidating pirates and making supply runs, not for going toe-to-toe with something that probably cost more than my home planet's entire GDP. But here's the thing about humans that the rest of the galaxy never quite seems to get. We're not stupid stubborn, yes. Occasionally suicidal, absolutely, but not stupid. While Commander X-Thoro was busy showing off her ship's impressive firepower, and don't get me wrong, it was genuinely impressive, we were busy being human, which is to say, we were cheating. See the Meridian. Might not have been a battleship, but it was a patrol vessel. And patrol vessels have one advantage that the big scary warships don't. They're expendable. When you're designed to get into trouble and probably not come back, you tend to get some interesting modifications. Like, for instance, a rather creative interpretation of safety regulations when it came to our reactor core. Novak, I'd said, still sipping my coffee, like we weren't currently being shot at by weapons that could turn us into component atoms. Remember that thing we're not supposed to do with the reactor, the thing that would violate about 15 different safety codes and probably get us court-martialed? If we survived, he'd asked, that's the one, do it. What happened next was either a testament to human ingenuity or proof that we really are too stupid to live. Possibly both. Novak had rigged our reactor to dump its entire energy output through our deflector array. You know, the thing that's supposed to push space debris out of our way, creating what could charitably be called an emergency EMP pulse, and what the safety manual probably would have called catastrophic systems failure, resulting in immediate death. The pulse had knocked out about half the Keth'ari ships' systems, including their weapons, and more importantly, their engines dead in space, as it were. Of course, it had also knocked out most of our systems, including life support communications and the coffee maker, which in my opinion was taking things too far. That's when they boarded us. Keth'ari boarding tactics are pretty much what you'd expect from a species of giant armored murder insects. Lots of cutting through bulkheads, lots of intimidating, chittering sounds, and a general approach that could be summarized as kill everything that moves and ask questions later. They'd swept through the ship like a plague of really aggressive locusts, capturing my crew and herding us all onto the bridge, which brings us back to the present moment. With Commander Zixth standing over me asking why I wasn't running and me explaining the critical importance of proper coffee consumption. "You jest," she said, and her translator made it sound like an accusation. "Do I look like I'm jesting?" I asked, taking another sip. "This is Premium Colombian Commander Dark Roast. You don't interrupt Premium Colombian for anything short of a planetary emergency, and even then you'd better have a really good reason." The other Keth'ari soldiers, and there were about a dozen of them scattered around the bridge, all looking like they'd stepped out of a particularly violent nature. Documentary shifted uncomfortably. I got the impression that their usual boarding experiences didn't involve discussions of coffee brewing techniques. Your species, Zixth said slowly, is insane. Yeah, we get that a lot, I admitted, but here's what I don't get. You guys have been conquering species for, 3,000 years, and in all that time, nobody ever told you about humans. We have heard stories, she said. And the way she said it made it clear that those stories were probably filed under galactic urban legends right next to the friendly bureaucrat and reasonable parking fees. Stories, I repeated. Right. Well, let me tell you a story, Commander. A little tale about why the human approach to things might not be what you're used to. I leaned back in my chair, which, by the way, was surprisingly comfortable for something I might be dying in, and gestured vaguely at the view screen, which was currently showing the two ships drifting together like a couple of very expensive pieces of space junk. Once upon a time, I began, there was a species called humans, and humans unlike. Most sensible species in the galaxy evolved on what we like to call a death world. Now, I know that sounds dramatic, but stick with me here. Zixth's mandibles clicked impatiently, but she didn't interrupt. Professional courtesy, I guess. Or maybe she was just curious to see where this was going. See Earth. That's our home planet. Earth doesn't want us to exist. Never has. Everything on that planet, from the weather to the wildlife to the geology itself, has spent the last few million years trying. Its absolute best to kill us. We've got predators that hunt in packs, natural disasters that can level entire continents, diseases that can wipe out civilizations, and weather patterns that change so fast they make bipolar disorder look like a model of consistency. I paused for another sip of coffee. Still good crisis. Situations really bring out the flavor. Most species, I continued, when faced with a hostile environment, develop one of two responses. They either adapt to avoid the danger, or they develop technology to overcome it. Humans, being humans, did both. And then we did something else. Something that, frankly, no sensible species would ever do, which was Zixth asked despite herself. We decided that if our environment was going to try to kill us, we'd get better at not dying. And if we got really, really good at not dying, maybe we could turn that into a competitive advantage. I gestured to my crew, who were all sitting around the bridge, with the kind of calm that comes from either complete professional competence or complete resignation to fate. Hard to tell which. You see, Commander, when your species spends a few million years getting really good at not dying, you develop certain attitudes. Like, for instance, the attitude that just because something is bigger, scarier, and better armed than you doesn't mean you should give up without a fight. Or the attitude that sometimes the best solution to a problem is the one that nobody in their right mind would ever try. You speak of your reactor modification, she said, among other things. Yeah. See, most species look at a problem and think, what's the safest, most reliable way to solve this, humans? Look at a problem and think, what's the most creative way we can solve this that will also give us a really good story to tell afterward? I finished my coffee and set the mug down. It made a little clink against the armrest of my chair, which in the current silence sounded about as loud as a gunshot, which brings us to the current situation. I said, "You've captured my ship, taken my crew prisoner, and are presumably planning to either kill us all or drag us back to wherever it is you Keth'ari do your conquering from standard operating procedure, right? Probably worked great. I don't know. How many species have you guys conquered? Now 47, she said. And there was definitely pride in that number. 47? Impressive. Must have been pretty straightforward. Show up with overwhelming force, demand, surrender, vaporize anyone who doesn't comply immediately. Rinse and repeat until you own the galaxy. Right, her silence was answer enough, but here's the thing, Commander. Those 47 species, they were all sensible, they did. The math realized they couldn't win and made the rational choice to surrender rather than face annihilation, which from a purely logical standpoint was absolutely the right call. I stood up from my chair, and immediately, half a dozen Keth'ari weapons swiveled to track me. Professional paranoia I could respect. That humans, I said, are not sensible. We're the species that looked at flight and decided that strapping explosives to our backs was a reasonable approach. We're the species that solved the problem of dangerous wildlife by making most of it extinct, and then felt bad about it and started conservation programs. We're the species that figured out how to split atoms and immediately used that knowledge to build weapons that could destroy our entire planet and then somehow managed not to use them. For 70 years running, I walked over to one of the bridge windows slowly, because I'm not suicidal, just making a point, and looked out at the Keth'ari battlecruiser. It really was an impressive piece of engineering, probably took decades to build cost. More than most planets' entire economies, and represented the absolute pinnacle of their military technology. Your ship, I said, is amazing truly. But it has one fatal flaw, which is, Zixth asked, and I could hear the genuine curiosity in her voice now. It assumes that your enemies will be reasonable. That's when the first explosion echoed through both ships. Now, I should probably explain what had been happening while I'd been giving my little speech about human nature and coffee appreciation. See, while Commander Zixth had been focused on the bridge and the apparent insanity of the human captain who wouldn't stop talking, my crew had been demonstrating another uniquely human trait, the ability to work together even when everything has gone completely to hell. Engineers, it turns out, are basically the same everywhere in the galaxy. They see a problem, they fix it. They see a system, they improve it. They see an opportunity to make something explode in a particularly creative way. Well, let's just say that explosions are a universal language. Chief Engineer Brooks, a woman who could probably rebuild a starship engine using nothing but spare parts and sheer bloody-mindedness, had been having a very productive conversation with some of the Keth'ari technical teams who'd been examining our damaged reactor. Turns out when you speak engineer, species barriers tend to break down pretty quickly. Also turns out that Keth'ari engineers are just as curious about human technology as human engineers are about everything else, which is how Brooks had managed to explain in great technical detail exactly how our little reactor modification had worked and how it could be improved, and how with the right modifications to the Keth'ari ship systems, you could probably create a feedback loop that would well explode things. The second explosion was louder than the first, and it was definitely coming from the Keth'ari ship. What Zix started to say, but she was interrupted by her own communication system crackling to life with what sounded like several different Keth'ari voices all trying to report catastrophic systems failures. At the same time, I looked at my watch, a genuine antique from Earth mechanical movement. The kind of thing that keeps working even when every electronic system within a light year has been fried by electromagnetic pulses. Right on schedule, I said cheerfully. The third explosion was accompanied by the lights going out. Emergency lighting kicked in a few seconds later, bathing the bridge in that lovely red glow that says, "Everything is fine. Nothing to worry about. Please proceed to the nearest escape pod in an orderly fashion." Zix Thor was now receiving what sounded like a constant stream of damage reports from her ship, and from what I could make out through the translator, they were having some serious problems. "You see, Commander," I said, while we were having our little chat about human nature and the finer points of coffee preparation, my people were doing what humans do best. They were improvising. Another explosion, this one close enough to rattle the deck plates. "Your engineers," I continued, "are very good.